So I want to explain a very small bit about what Enterprise Ireland actually does, because I think it's important that you understand where we're coming from, and then you'll be able to make sense of the later slides. So we're an Irish government-funded agency responsible for the growth of Irish companies in global markets. Our annual budget is about 343 million. If you think about that in Polish terms, our population is about 10% of yours. We have an international selling network of 33 offices outside Ireland. So again, we're quite different. We're more integrated, I think, than you'll see in Poland. So we're both the Overseas Export Agency, the Enterprise Development Agency, and the Innovation Agency all rolled into one. Sorry, okay. So we have innovation activities across all Irish-based industry, including multinationals, which gives us very good linkages into that community, and we support high-growth industries. So in terms of our startups, we fund 101 high-potential startups every year. So, and plus another 128 on a 50K initial seed round competitive basis to give them a fighting chance of developing to the next stage. And of that, 63 in 2016 were startups led by women, which is 27% of the startups that we've funded, which is a growing number in Ireland. And also, as Bartek mentioned, we are, by number of investments, the largest seed fund in Europe, but also the third largest globally. I won't spend too long on this slide, but just to say we believe innovation is a huge part of driving both startups and mature companies. Our information from our companies gathered over the last number of decades would show that those companies that invest significantly in innovation can survive market shocks and economic downturns and still thrive in those circumstances, whereas those who are not as differentiated find it much harder. I would also say that those companies that invest significantly in R&D within our portfolio would show greater employment and exports. And for those who invest in R&D and also collaborate with others, and there's an order of magnitude difference in sales and exports. So innovation to us is really, really important. Also scale. We talk a lot about startups, but I think in Ireland, the biggest challenge are those startups who will continue and grow to scale. And it's something that we work really hard at, but we don't think we're there yet. Key challenges for facing Irish companies currently, you may or may not have heard about this thing called Brexit. It's not so much that Brexit is a huge challenge for us, it's the fact that we are cognizant of large market shocks and having an ecosystem of companies that can withstand those. Competitiveness is always an issue for us. Make sure our cost base is correct. Innovation and R&D, as I've mentioned, is really, really important to us because we've got the evidence built up over a number of decades that it works for us. Ambition and talent. We all need more talent. And that scale question. So we've a new strategy we're just kicking off. It will take us out to 2020. What we're expecting from our 5,000 client base is an export growth up to 26 billion per annum from the 20 billion that's passed this year. 60,000 new jobs, a greater spend on R&D within our client base facilitated by us, and a greater spend by those in the Irish economy. With that, I'm going to leave that and get to finance. So when I was involved in my first startup in 1984, none of this existed. So all we had was a grant-based system, which was run by an agency at the time who was very, very good at attracting foreign direct investment into Ireland, but not so good at looking after homegrown. And probably the single biggest difference between that agency, which is still very successful to this day, and what was needed is the fact that a grant-based system for attracting and helping companies grow doesn't work for startups, because grant doesn't help you with cash flow. So we had to redesign and redevelop our economic funding model from scratch. And this is the economic funding environment we have in Ireland today. So if we look here, at the very early stage, there's interventions from Horizon 2020, believe it or not, accelerators, our Competitive Start Fund, and our HPSU fund. So this is very much the space that Enterprise Ireland plays in. But if we left it at that, we'd be going nowhere, because there's no point in co-funding helping get with that seed round if the follow-on investment isn't there in the community. So again, back in 1984, there was no VC in Ireland. We had a couple of very significant, very few businessmen who were willing to take chances on investing in new startups, but there was no VC. So one of the things that we did was we took a lesson from Israel, and we looked at co-funding venture capital funds where we would act as an LP, and we would leave the management of the fund in the hands of the private sector. And I'll get into more detail on those, but that's something that's worked really well for us. There is now a VC industry and ecosystem in Ireland that's both grown nationally and is well connected internationally as well. So that's filled in, these other pieces here. So it was all done on a government co-funded basis with the private sector and managed by us. So direct equity, the stuff we do ourselves, we make those roughly 230 investments in a year. We do it directly. We co-fund with other seed investors and also the promoters themselves. And this is what our portfolio looks like today. So we've got roughly 2,300 investments made over a period of time. We currently have 1,250 companies in our portfolio that haven't exited or haven't sold. We make roughly 300 investments every year. And the cost of that portfolio is about 300 million. Every year, that 300 million brings us in about 30. Last year, it brought us in 70, but that was an exceptional year. So it is paying off for us, but we don't invest on a VC basis. We expect to see participation in a return if there is one, but we're not driving exits. We're there because we're looking for the growth of sustainable companies who will employ and export from Ireland. This is the sectoral spread in our portfolio. I don't think there'll be any shock there, but the largest investment is digital technologies and has been for quite some period of time. The direct equity investment from us comes with, because we're a full service agency covering all aspects of the life cycle in a company, we have an account manager who works with all the companies that we invest, help them develop strategy, help them bring in another range of industry supports, key hires, R&D, support for leadership and management. And also, we help introduce them to other funders, as you would have heard earlier. Our objectives are, given that we had a blank landscape in the early 80s and we had to fill it out, we need to work with the client companies, because having brought on seed funds, and that works well, and then suddenly you realize, well, okay, you need mid-sized funds and then you need growth capital funds to follow on. And you can't really wait for one to run out before you start on the next one. And then when you've got to the top end, you've got to realize that all those seed funds are going through a cycle and they run out too. So there's a constant demand for us to stay in touch with the clients, stay in touch with the sectors that are important to us, and make sure that the funding that's put in place addresses those needs. Also, business angels are a really important part, particularly at seed stage. Very few VCs actually invest in seed stage in Ireland, and I think that's generally true. So we work with the Halo Business Angel Network, which consists of a number of business information centres around the country, and also a number of consortia, which are formed and supported through the Halo Business Angel Network. This is the journey on our seed fund and our investment with the private. We started way back in 1994 with 4 programs, each of which was euro for euro matched with private sector, each of which had a very specific focus. So there was an ICT fund, there was a life sciences fund, a specialist food fund, and we took that approach. Moving on, we got to the point where we had 47 different funds, and this time we were putting in maybe about a 1 in 3 of the money that was raised from the private sector. Total funds raised 1.5 billion. There's a listing of the private sector VC funds that we've worked with over that time, around the edges here. And of the 1.5 billion, just under 1 billion of it is currently invested, leaving about $500 million more to go. I suppose rather than talking about funds, if I just talk about one case and how they navigated it, one startup, and this was one that was a long time in gestation. This is a company, one of the few companies in our experience that actually started out of a European framework project. We don't get too many of those. I'm not sure what the Polish experience is. A company called Feed Henry, and they did their framework. They got investment from us before company formation in terms of developing out their the product and the commercialization. But they tried to launch and they failed to launch for probably about 3 years. And the single biggest difference in the end was us introducing them to an experienced CEO who actually would put some money in, but more importantly, knew what it took to run a tech company and also what it took to reach out to other investors. So these guys way back, they had a platform for managing widgets. I don't know, does anybody here even remember what a widget is at this stage? But the CEO came in and said, look guys, same platform, but we're in the era of apps, and apps are where it's at. Within 6 months with that knowledge and retuning the pitch, he had raised a seed round probably around $750,000. Within the following 18 months, he got a follow-on investment of about $7.5 million from a couple of very large US corporate investors. And a year after that, they were acquired by Red Hat for $82 million. So not exactly an overnight success. Probably a bunch of lessons around it. They benefited from our ecosystem at every stage, right through from our help in accessing those European funds, right through to commercialization before company formation, right through to HPSU investment, introduction to other investors. But the most important thing was the team, and I think any investor will tell you that. And that team was down to getting in that key influence from an experienced CEO. With that, I'll probably stop because I think it might be more interesting if people had questions about our experience.
As I understand, you invest in a company registered in Ireland, yes? So what is your goal to present as a presentation? So you believe that or you plan to choose some startups here in Poland and ask them to move to Ireland? Or we should move to Ireland and then ask how it's works?
I'm in your house, I wouldn't do that. I think that the objective was to share some of our experience around what it took for us to create a funding ecosystem and just to test how that's developing here in Poland and are there things we're missing. Because for instance, those seed funds that we put together, we looked at what Israel was doing. We're constantly looking to see what other countries are doing, to see what lessons can we bring home and adapt for an Irish situation. But if you want to talk to us in Ireland, that's okay. But not what I'm here for. Yeah.
Polish
yeah.
ecosystem, like startup hub.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. You said that Brexit won't be a problem. What about your funds you are receiving, like Horizon 2020?
Well, we're not in the UK, so that won't be a problem. And actually, just to stick with the Horizon 2020 funds, probably the most significant contributor for us in the within Horizon 2020 has actually been the SME instrument. So we're actually the #1 taker of projects out of the SME instrument. And it's not just because it's the money, it's because of where the SME instrument is positioned. So we can put in a seed round where we put in anywhere between 250 up to about 750K, at least matched by the private sector. But for technology intensive companies, that'll only get them so far, and it may not be far enough to make them attractive for a Series A round. And I believe that's where the SME instrument fits. So far, 19 of our companies have gotten more than $1 million out of the SME instrument. So we find it actually fills a gap for us and is quite significant. And because we're not leaving, I don't anticipate that'll change soon. So are we seeing any benefit to Ireland from Brexit? Okay, so ask me that when we know what Brexit actually looks like. I'm not being smart. In the short term, Brexit to us causes currency fluctuations, and because Britain is still our most significant trading partner. For certain industries, particularly our food industry, which is more commodity based, that's always going to be a challenge. I think until the specific shape of Brexit is known, it's very hard to anticipate whether we'll see an exit of talent that will come to us. I mean, our Inward Investment Agency is hot on the case. Our Science Funding Agency is also hot on the case, because I believe the UK gets more back from the science funding from Horizon 2020 than it actually contributes. So naturally there's going to be some shortfall. So I would think there are people nervous, and we will do our best to accommodate them if they want to come. But so far it's really, really difficult to tell. Yeah, sorry.
Here, yeah. What's your deal at the beginning? A fund? I mean, fixed equity for like fixed stake, and to what extent are you diluted at exit?
Okay, so we never want more than a 10% stake in a company, because we don't believe the state should be controlling companies or having a controlling interest in companies. On the other hand, the reason we are there is that if you look at the sums been raised, so anywhere, if you put our money with the promoters' money and the seed money going in from others, the rounds are somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million. The due diligence for most VCs is too difficult at that stage. So we actually do it. So, you know, the fact that we're in there is an attractor for VCs who know the Irish scene to invest, and for other investors, because we're taking effectively the cost of the due diligence. So we never want more than 10%. It's fully diluting. We go in what's called pari passu with every other investor, same terms and conditions. And I would say, if you're, I'm surprised nobody's asked me what kind of return we're getting yet, but roughly it's about 2x our money back over a 15-year period. So that's not exactly VC ambition territory. But it works for us, because it means the state's getting twice its money back, but we're investing in these companies for sustainable jobs and for exports. And we're getting that dividend. We've gotten 2x our money back, and we still have a portfolio of 1,200 companies that have the potential to take money back in the future. So it's a good deal from the state point of view, but it's not VC behavior, I think.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if you can somehow compare the Polish ecosystem and the Irish ecosystem and if, like, you can say which part is the part that if the startups really need help, they have to go to Ireland in order to make it better.
Okay, again, I'm not on a recruitment drive. We have a reasonably good idea what's happening in Poland from an agency point of view, because we're part of a trans-European exchange club called TAFTI. I don't know if anybody has come across it, but it's where the innovation funding agencies around Europe share information on the schemes they run. But agencies talking to each other is one thing. I think it's far more interesting to hear from the people who are actually trying to use those mechanisms. Where are the pitfalls really in them? Because at a top level, you can kind of say, well, government's putting money in and everything's great. I think if you ask entrepreneurs here, you ask entrepreneurs in Ireland, they'll always tell you the system ain't perfect. And I think we need to listen to that pulse and try and react and improve things.
So, Geroid, we spoke earlier about Irish startups, and you said that fintech is one industry where they have a strong point. So how is the Irish banking industry reacting? Are they embracing the startups? Are they acquiring the startups in fintech, or they are co-working with them? How is the status on that?
So here's where I get really honest. If you're talking about the Irish national banking system, it's been through a really rough period during the financial downturn, and in our agency's opinion, it's not back to full strength in terms of SME lending. So there's definitely a deficit there. And I think there's the traditional difficulty in the banking system from a lending and a debt point of view, understanding the companies to make loans to them. So that's not working from our point of view. We are working with the major pillar banks to try and increase their understanding of the value in investing in the companies and what's safe and how to actually evaluate a proposition. But we have an international financial services centre in Dublin where large global players have come in. So you have the likes of Citibank, Deutsche Bank, and a bunch of others. And they are showing a huge interest in the startup. They are the ones that I would say are even spending some of their own money pump priming the startup system. The likes of MasterCard, for instance, have an in-house accelerator, a large one in Dublin. So that's where we're getting the traction. It's not so much with the national banks, unfortunately. Maybe sometime soon.
Actually, Zencard started in Dublin, and MasterCard's accelerator that Geroid mentioned. And from what I know, that their experience of Dublin ecosystem was really good. And just to kind of follow on the Enterprise Alliance offering, I can add that it works as a very good transmission belt system. So if you're a small entrepreneur, you can grow and scale, and you can get also really integrated access to international markets. We have 32 offices all over the globe, including one in Warsaw, I think 5 in the US, Australia, Asia, and we work really closely with Dublin in supporting these companies in international growth, in exports, and linking them to potential business partners and customers. And my question would be, Maciej mentioned Berlin and London, and where do you see Dublin? What are its strengths and weaknesses?
Okay, so it's really difficult for a city in a country of a population of 4.5 million to compare itself to London or Berlin. And for us, it's not about the volume of startups that we see, because we believe we have a very healthy ecosystem. Apart from the ones that we invest in, we probably look over close to 3,000 projects a year. So we're not short of ideas, we're not short of entrepreneurs from other countries coming in. We would welcome them, but for us the thing is actually scaling the companies. So when I said we invest in high potential startup companies, what I mean by that is we expect in their business plan a minimum ambition for 1 million in sales and 10 employees within 3 years. And that's a pretty low bar, but we're kind of saying that's the lowest ambition we want to see from a proposition to us. Having said that, probably about 1/3 of our companies that we invest in actually hit that low bar within the 3 years. So scale is a big issue for us. Now, that number is slowly but surely creeping up, but it can't go up half quickly enough for us. So for us, quantity is great, but we've got to focus on the quality, and we've got to focus on the startups that have the ability to scale. Because we're not a VC, we're not in it for a quick turn. As I mentioned, it could take 14 or 15 years for us to see a financial return, but we are in it for the employment and exports out of Ireland, so we've got to focus on the ones that can scale. So that's probably dodging most of the question you asked, but I can't think of any other way to answer it.